Hello out there, beautiful world. Welcome back to another edition of Mike Farrell Sports Talk. My name's Adam, and Mike Farrell is with me. Great news, everybody. They played college football this weekend. The games were great, and luckily Mike and I are going to break them all down for you here on this particular episode. Mike, first off, great slate of games this weekend. You had to be pretty excited about what you saw.
Yeah, I think it lived up to the hype. I mean, we knew we had a good weekend. This was the best weekend of college football going in. We had three, top 10 matchups. I consider TCU Oklahoma State a top 10 matchup. But we also had some other intriguing games as well. USC Utah, Clemson Florida State. So it was a good weekend, and all of these games kind of were competitive. I mean, Clemson obviously ended up winning by 6, and it wasn't as close as that. But all the other games that I could think of were very competitive, starting with the Alabama-Tennessee game, which is what everybody's talking about now.
Well, you mentioned the hype, no pun intended there for Josh Heupel, Tennessee head coach, who in his second year in Rocky Top takes down Nick Saban 52-49. A back and forth game, Mike, but for sure the game of the weekend. I know last week we talked about whether you thought Tennessee or Ole Miss had a better chance to beat Alabama. I think you said Ole Miss at that point in time. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that is now proven to be incorrect as Tennessee comes out on top. First and foremost, just your thoughts on the overall game itself. I mean, I know we'll talk about what it means for both sides, but just the back and forth of the game and what you think, the game means as you think about the season.
Obviously an exciting game. A lot of different aspects to take away from it. How penalized Alabama was, how they had another couple special teams issues. Nick Saban losing his mind on the sidelines. But the biggest thing to me was in the fourth quarter on the scoop and score from Dallas Turner. Alabama goes ahead by a touchdown after being down by a touchdown. I thought that was it. That's the type of play that usually, spells doom for a team that's lost 15 straight to a particular program. It's not an excuse, but any sort of issue like that is hard to bounce back from. So when, Tennessee's able to go right down the field, tie the game, hold Alabama to a long field goal attempt, it's missed. They go down in 2 plays and nail a makeable field goal. It's just, that's different, not only from a Tennessee perspective, because I think they would have folded in previous years, but also from an Alabama perspective, because, in the national championship game in January, Alabama came within a point in the fourth quarter of Georgia. And at that point in time, I thought, okay, here we go. Georgia hasn't won a national title since 1980. Alabama's been there, done that. This is the momentum changer. And Georgia just rolled right down the field, scored very quickly, and the game was pretty much out of reach after that. And again, my thought was this is going to be Tennessee folding tents. They didn't. Alabama does not have that killer instinct you're used to, and Tennessee has a little bit of that Georgia resiliency that we saw last season when they won the national championship.
I was just surprised. Alabama had no answers for Jalen Hyatt. I mean, he was just running wide open the entire game. They had no answers for that. That's just uncharacteristic from what we've seen from Alabama and a Nick Saban defense where, yeah, sure, teams are going to get theirs from time to time, but time and time again, Josh Heupel, Hendon Hooker went back to Jalen Hyatt. He was wide open. Mike, he was making plays all over the field. I haven't seen that against Alabama defense in a long, long time.
That's embarrassing. I mean, Nick Saban's the D-back guru. He prides himself on recruiting the best and coaching the best. They've had 1 billion first-rounders at defensive back, and the corners couldn't stay with, Hyatt. They also had struggled with Brew McCoy, that jump ball down the end, bad positioning. And the safeties were just awful. I don't want to point out one guy, but we did have one particular safety who was burned twice and took a bad angle on a third one. That's uncharacteristic Alabama football. Elias Ricks was brought over from LSU to help fix this. He's been banged up, has not really cracked the depth chart to what we've expected. And just a bad performance defensively overall that we're not used to seeing. I mean, obviously the stat is, since 1907, they haven't given up 50 or more points. Now they have. But so many different uncharacteristic Alabama things on defense too. Missed tackles, out of position. The pass rush, I didn't see anything scary. Will Anderson's a great player for sure, but they've figured out how to chip him. And the other guys have not sort of stepped up to the level I expected them to. And Hendon Hooker had, a fairly clean pocket most of the game. And when he didn't, he made the right decision whether to tuck and run or, keep his eyes downfield. He was great. And short of Bryce Young, this Alabama team would have lost this game probably by 4 touchdowns. If he wasn't playing, Milroe was playing, they would have lost by 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, I was going to say, for as bad as the Alabama defense was, Bryce Young was fantastic. Obviously, it's not going to be remembered, but he made play after play where the pocket broke down. He scrambled forward. That touchdown late that he threw to Cameron Latu. I mean, he made that himself, right? He scrambled forward, found him wide open. Without both him and Jahmyr Gibbs, who ran the ball for over 100 yards. I mean, the way they came back, people forget. I mean, they were down 28-10 at one point, and they made a nice comeback, and that was all Bryce Young. It's unfortunate that it's going to get overshadowed by what you saw from Alabama's defense and really Tennessee's offense, but Bryce Young played fantastic.
Well, you could make an argument his career is being wasted on it.
Sure.
He's better than Mac Jones. He's better than Tua. To me, anyways, when it comes to a guy who feels the pressure, never is cool as a cucumber, never gets hurried, never gets rushed, has his eyes downfield all the time when he's moving around and always seems to make a big play and doesn't have to do it with his feet. He's exceptional. And you could make an argument that he's better than any quarterback that they've had in all of their recent national title runs. And he's being wasted. He was wasted last year. When Jamison Williams went down, they had no speed. They had no separation. This year, they just don't have any to start with. They have no speedy wide receivers. They should have lost the Texas game if it weren't for him. And they lost this game, and it was not his fault. So Bill O'Brien, and this is something, it's funny. I said at the beginning of the season, I had some coordinators on the hot seat, and I had Bill O'Brien on there, and people laughed at me. They're like, what are you, crazy? Team scored 45 points or more almost every game last season, went to the national title game, blah, blah, blah. No, this is Alabama. You lose a game, you're in trouble as a coordinator. Now, I didn't put, Golding on there simply because I thought the defense was going to be really good, with all the returning players. I was worried about the offense. But Bill O'Brien's wasted Bryce Young. Just has, and that's a shame because, Bryce Young, barring something strange, isn't going to win a national title at Alabama, and he should.
17 for 130, Mike. Those were the penalties and penalty yards against Alabama. I mean, if I had told you before the game you're going to see 17 Alabama penalties, what would you have said to me if I had told you that that's what's going to happen?
I would have said this is Texas all over again. I mean, they had 100 yards in penalties against Texas. Very, very undisciplined play. Guys not on the same page. It's just really.
Well, to be fair, the Tennessee crowd caused a lot of that. I mean, that noise level was absolutely getting with the offensive line for a while. But some of these, to your point, are undisciplined penalties that you saw.
Well, we're not used to seeing this as well. I mean, we're just not used to seeing this from a Nick Saban team. The dumb penalties, that's unheard of. Motion, holding is all subjective.
Happens every play, yeah.
But, some of the clock issues, use of timeouts, stuff like that, I'm just not used to seeing. And that has nothing to do with penalties, but overall sloppiness of the game, sloppiness of play, sloppiness of game plan, no adjustment whatsoever on defense. I mean, Jalen Hyatt's routes, if you diagram them, they're not intricate routes. It's the same thing almost every time. I mean, it's not every time, but it's just working the middle of the field and knowing that they can't take the right angles on you or they're not going to be effective getting over. There wasn't anything fancy done. This is what Tennessee does. They go out there. They didn't even have their best wide receiver, and they just lit him up. And so I think he got out coached because he's the head coach, right? Everybody says fire Bill O'Brien, fire people, fire them all, right? Well, you're the head coach. These are the guys you hired. These are the guys you stuck with after last season. And again, last season wasn't a failure. You went to the title game, but you didn't win it. So he has to be held accountable. Josh Heupel and his staff outcoached him, and that's something you rarely say. And Kirby, outcoached them in the national championship game. So this isn't like, oh, is Saban getting senile? Has he lost it? But you lose coordinator after coordinator after coordinator, and you have the Nick Saban rehabilitation system. Some of these guys just aren't going to work out sometimes. And Bill O'Brien is putting up points, but there's something missing there. Without Gibbs and Young, they're just nothing. And the defense is just atrocious.
I mean, I don't want to get lost that Tennessee actually won this game. So let's talk about them for another second. I mean, when Josh Heupel was hired, I mean, folks were losing their mind. This is who we went out and got. This is the head coach. You had options. Everyone was up in arms that Danny White, the AD, just went back to UCF and found his old friend. And that got kind of lambasted for a while. Yeah. What do you make of the hire now? 6-0 Tennessee. Josh Heupel, you just said out-coached Nick Saban. What do you make of the hire for Heupel to Tennessee now?
Great hire, and we didn't see it coming. I mean, you covered Central Florida. This guy was good on offense. He was, a productive offensive play caller, but nothing special, nothing that we saw that was going to take Hendon Hooker from Virginia Tech and turn him into a Heisman candidate. Nothing that said they're going to put 50 points on Alabama, 45 plus points on LSU. Like, it just do what they're going to do, and they're going to do it. They're going to snap it every 10 seconds, and they're going to, run a lot of the same plays, and you can't stop them. It was considered a lazy hire. It was considered a lazy hire by, the Central Florida athletic director getting his buddy, and nobody figured it would work out this well, and it really has. And I think he's done a much better job here than he did at UCF.
1,000%, yeah.
And I think a lot of the criticism that he had to deal with at UCF was coming off that miracle season and Scott Frost and all the magic that everybody saw there and expected him to replicate. But I will tell you this, it's very intriguing to see a guy like that now, the head coach of Tennessee, with a top 5 program, and Oklahoma, even though they beat Kansas, struggling so badly. Man, Oklahoma fans would love this offense. It's Oklahoma's offense. It's made for Oklahoma in the Big 12. And now we're seeing it pick apart the SEC, and everybody said it couldn't be done because of the speed of the SEC. Well, people said Urban Meyer couldn't run his offense when he came over from Utah, and he did, and he won national championships. And now we got Heupel, proving everybody wrong. You know what we're going to do? Stop it. Good luck. And you can't.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about Heupel a little bit. Obviously, this offense is born under Mike Leach, right? That was his OC when he was at Oklahoma. He was there for a bunch of years, got let go, went to Utah State for a year, went to Missouri for a year, was on nobody's radar before he went to UCF. Took that 2018 team within basically 8 points of going undefeated for a second straight season. And where he's grown, Mike, I will say the criticism on Heupel was really nothing about X's and O's. It was about off the field. It was about recruiting specifically. He did not have great relationships with the high school coaches in Orlando and that Central Florida area. But at Tennessee, that takes care of itself. He's a national brand, right? Now he has NIL deals as well. We didn't have that, or that wasn't a thing back when he was at UCF. I think the deficiencies that he may have had as a coach, and you can look at his recruiting classes in 19 and 20 and 21 and see where those kids are at now. That's taking care of itself at Tennessee. Now it's just X's and O's. And I remember we had a former player tell us that Heupel's offense, because we used to joke all the time that Heupel's offense was 4 plays. That was it. 4 plays on this side, flipping the other side. That was his entire playbook. And we had somebody tell us that Heupel's offense is the most complicated, simple offense he's ever seen. And that they make single, small adjustments on their plays, and that's it. But the basic philosophy is my guy is better than your guy. And I know it, and until you stop it, I'm going to keep doing it. And that was Heupel's offense, and I think that's matured with SEC talent. He's actually done a little bit better job. I'm not sure if he called the plays a lot or OC Alex Golish called the plays. He never went over the middle at UCF. He was using the middle of the field a bunch at Tennessee here. But I think he's grown up a bunch. But I think the off the field stuff is where UCF fans were always kind of down on him. And at Tennessee, that takes care of itself. I mean, he gets those recruits just on the orange and white checkerboard alone.
But I mean, he didn't inherit a roster filled with 5 stars. I mean, Hendon Hooker was a 3-star kid out of North Carolina and went to Virginia Tech. So that's not like, a transfer in from Alabama. Jalen Wright, Jabari Small, the running backs, solid recruits, but nothing like 5-star crazy. Jalen Hyatt wanted to go to Clemson. He's a South Carolina kid. They didn't want him. Brew McCoy is the only 5-star other than Darnell Wright, the offensive tackle, on this football team. So, I get your point, but what I think he's done is he's coached these kids into his offense more so than I expected him to. And by that, I mean, Hooker wasn't running this type of offense. And Hooker, honestly, he lost a job to Joe Milton, if we all remember correctly. Joe Milton was named Hooker at the beginning of last season, and everybody was dumbfounded. He sort of massaged Hooker into this confidence level and coached him into this comfort level in this offense. And I think he's getting more out of Jalen Hyatt than we would see at other places. Brew McCoy, he couldn't find a home. Texas, USC, portal, this, that, and the other, off-field issues. Focus now. Cedric Tillman was always a good receiver, and he's been injured, but he's a dude. So I think he's done a really good job. Recruiting is coming. That's the scary part here for Tennessee fans, and again, not for Tennessee fans, for Tennessee opponents. And again, listen, they're 6-0. They could go out and lay an egg. All right, anything can happen in the SEC. You look at their schedule. They've beaten 4 top 25 football teams. Arguably, Pitt's probably not a top 25 football team. Florida certainly not living up to a top 25 football team. LSU's very erratic. Alabama has some weaknesses now, but these are very good wins. UT Martin's coming up. That'll be no problem. Kentucky, Georgia, those are going to be the 2 big tests. And you finish Missouri, South Carolina, Vanderbilt. You should win all those. So if they can get through those 2 games against ranked opponents, you would assume that they're going to get to, the SEC title game and, likely the playoff. But I think the best is yet to come. Tillman's going to be back, and recruiting is going to take off like that atmosphere on Saturday. Had a ton of recruits there. I mean, the recruiting visit list unofficially was 3 pages long. That's where it's going to pay dividends. So I think he inherited an okay team, but I think, the maturity of Hendon Hooker in this system and his belief in guys like Hyatt and his willingness and ability to coddle Brew McCoy, these are all amazing things that he wasn't able to do at UCF. He's matured as a coach, as a CEO, more so than anything, is my opinion.
What did you make of the scene afterwards? Goalposts go away, $100,000 later. Tennessee and Danny White are asking for donations. What did you make of the scene after the game?
That's just funny. Obviously they don't need donations to pay for goalposts. One recruiting trip, as we saw with Arch Manning, could be over $100,000. So, but it's just funny. It plays into the whole story. It was a crazy, crazy atmosphere. The cigar smoke probably reached Nashville. It's really what college football is all about. That college football can be clunky, can be slow, can be ugly, can be dumb with certain calls. I mean, the officiating in this game is awful on both sides. But the result of that field goal going through the uprights and the crowd rushing the field and taking the goalposts and then dumping them in the river, that's college football. That's like epic, crazy 100 years from now stories that somebody is going to lie about and say, 2022, I was there in Knoxville and helped carry the goalposts and dump it in the river. That's college football. It's just legendary stuff. And I think it's great. And I think what Tennessee did is asking for donations to replace the goalposts. And the way the tweet was put, oh, by the way, we realized in the next weekend we're going to need goalposts to play a football game. Can you guys bail us out? They'll get that $100,000. They probably already have it in a second, because if you win at Tennessee, everybody loves you and will support you forever. And imagine if this guy wins a national championship. This is Nebraska Southeast, this fan base. The world would explode if they won a national championship.
Yeah, I feel bad for the labor and delivery departments in 9 months in Knoxville, because I feel like they're going to be overrun with a lot of business. Mike, the only bad thing about that game is if you watched it, you missed another great game, which was going on at the same time. TCU, Oklahoma State were playing in that exact same window. TCU comes out on top overtime, 43-40, Mike. Again, a lot of people probably had their eyes set on Tennessee, Alabama. This was just as good a game as any. TCU is down 30-16 heading into the fourth quarter, and this thing comes back and ends up in, I think it was double overtime, and comes out with a TCU victory on top. I'm assuming you were flipping back and forth throughout these games. What did you make of TCU's comeback? And they continue, good old Max Duggan continues to find a way to pull some of this stuff out.
Just insane. So I watched the replay. I was flipping, but I wanted to focus mostly on Alabama, Tennessee. So I watched the replay. of this game. So I was able to give it the focus that it deserves because, again, like I said, I consider this a top 10 matchup. The two best teams so far in the Big 12, and both healthy. Kansas is a great team, but Jalen Daniels being injured kind of puts a little bit of it takes away a little bit of that steam of the Oklahoma win. And Texas is good until they're not good. And I don't even have to explain that. We all know what that means.
Understood. Yep.
These two teams, I expected a high-scoring game for sure. I expected Oklahoma State to win, and I championed Mike Gundy is the best coach in the Big 12, and then he goes and blows that lead. It doesn't mean he's not the best coach in the Big 12, but Sonny Dykes is pretty darn good, and we're starting to see. I didn't believe this was a great hire. I thought they would struggle, forcing Gary Patterson out, and we could have a Texas situation here at TCU where, you force Mac Brown out and you just can't find the right solution to replace him. Well, they've found a guy that's making things work, and it's a really fun, balanced offense too. I mean, everybody thinks this is Sonny Dykes. It's going to be like throw the ball every 2 seconds. I mean, 22 carries, 104 yards, 2 touchdowns, and essentially helping to win the football game is Kendre Miller, who nobody really, except for TCU fans, nobody heard of him. And this is a dude who had 1,000 yards last year, but everybody knew of Zach Evans. And, oh, my gosh, they're losing Zach Evans. He's going to Ole Miss. What are we going to do? TCU fans know what they're going to do. They're going to give the ball to Kendre Miller. And Quentin Johnston continues to show what a great player he is. And Max Duggan's, honestly, I say the words because it sounds ridiculous. But I will. This is a Joe Burrow type of.
Oh, wow.
Well, okay, I'll go Kenny Pickett. How about that?
Okay.
Yeah, because Joe Burrow, that's ridiculous. I mean, he has 60 touchdowns.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
So flies in the face of what we're used to. Seeing from Max Duggan, not that he's bad, but I mean, he's incredibly efficient. Last year, 10 touchdowns, 4 picks. He didn't win the starting job this season. He came in. He's already rushed for more yards than he did all last season, blah, blah, blah. The guy is just making play after play after play, no mistakes. He's got 1 interception on the season. And he looks like a different human being than he was last year. And it's so odd to me that when we talk about TCU, we talk about Tennessee, these two guys are unbelievably efficient. And obviously Duggan is in the Heisman discussion to a lesser, level than Hooker. But they both lost the job. I mean, Hooker lost it last year at the start of the season, and Duggan lost it this year at the start of the season. It doesn't matter. They took that and made themselves stronger. They didn't jump in a portal. They didn't whine. They decided to get better. And hats off to him and Sonny Dykes.
What'd you make of that defense, though? We're going to talk about offense, right? But, Oklahoma State, they score. TCU scores second overtime. Oklahoma gets the ball first. Holding penalty on first down backs them up. And then 3 straight plays. Oklahoma State cannot complete a pass. TCU has them set up for a field goal, comes back and wins the game. We're going to talk offense, but TCU's defense stepped up. I know they gave up 30 by the time the third quarter ended. But after that, they literally pitched a shutout except for that overtime. Mike, I think that TCU defense probably gets overlooked a little bit, too.
Yeah, I mean, when you see a 43-40, you think there wasn't any defenses played, but there was defense played in the right spots and some play calling that you might question. Also on the Oklahoma State side of things. And, the win probability factor on ESPN is hilarious because it was up at like 98% at one point in time or something like that. And then you watch the chart and you just look at it and it completely goes like this. It's all. I know you're not watching if you're listening to this, but what I'm doing is I'm at 98% for Oklahoma State, and then I'm dropping down to 100% TCU to win. I mean, this game was Oklahoma State's game from the start. I mean, they went up 14-0, 14-7, then it's 24-10. They just controlled the game. TCU hung in there with their game plan. They didn't abandon the run. They didn't abandon some of the things that they knew would keep Oklahoma State off balance. And the defense bowed up and they lost some really, really good football players on defense to that portal. A couple guys, starters. There's a starter at Ole Miss, there's a starter at Nebraska. I mean, they lost a lot of really good guys. So credit Sonny Dykes and his coaching staff on that side of the ball too, because I know 43-40 looks like there's no defense played, and in 52-49 there was no defense played, but there was some in this game at least.
I asked you a few weeks ago who owned the Big 12 at this point. You had said Oklahoma State. Now we've seen Oklahoma State lose. You've seen Kansas State play okay. You've seen Kansas lose. Obviously, TCU now sort of the cream of the crop, at least by schedule, by results. Are they your now leader in the clubhouse in your mind for the Big 12?
I don't think anybody knows. I don't think anybody has any freaking clue what's going to happen here. Honestly, Kansas State, which still got that head-scratching loss, after they beat Missouri and before, I believe it was they beat Oklahoma, they lose to Tulane. It makes no sense. They're at TCU.
Tulane now ranks, by the way. Tulane now ranked 25, so they've snuck into the rankings. I mean, I'm not saying they're a great team, but they're playing okay.
And they won, an absolute rock fight last time against Iowa State, 10-9. I mean, that's disgusting. It's horrible. They don't beat anybody badly except for Missouri. I mean, Texas Tech was a battle, 37-28. They could easily beat TCU, but then they got to play Oklahoma State. Easily lose to Oklahoma State. It's all about matchups here. So I don't really know. I do know. I believe Texas will not. Texas's final run here is really scary to me. So I don't think they're a contender to win the Big 12, but I think everybody else is. And by that, I mean, Texas has Oklahoma State, Kansas State, TCU, then they're at Kansas, and they finish with a Baylor team that's been a little bit of a disappointment. I'm still going to say my dark horse, Kansas State. I still think Martinez is free, from the Nebraska shackles of losing. Deuce Vaughn is dangerous. They've got a really solid defense and a really strong offensive line, and they can run the football. So I think Kansas State could be the team. But, I don't want to discount TCU. I still think Oklahoma State should have won that football game. I still think Oklahoma State's the best team. But I think Kansas State's probably the one to watch right now.
We'll find out. TCU, Kansas State play this weekend, Mike. So that'll get settled on the field. Let's go back to the 12 noon window. Michigan, Penn State. This was a 16-14 Michigan lead at halftime, Mike. Wasn't a pretty first half. And then Michigan put the gas on them, scored, basically 15 in the third, 10 in the fourth, and run away with this one, 41-17. For a while there, it looked close, but Penn State just could not hang with Michigan.
Yeah, it just came down to the run game. I mean, if you can't stop the run game and it wears you down, which it did, eventually, these two running backs, Blake Corums, you could make a case for the best running back in college football. I mean, there'd be some who disagree. Illinois fans might disagree. Texas fans might disagree. Ohio State fans, but he's really, really good. He's in the top 5. Donovan Edwards is he's been injured the last few games, but he's a real dangerous, receiving threat as well as a runner, different type of runner. These guys are going to start busting off long runs if you get tired and worn down, and that's exactly what we saw. Michigan does not go away from their game plan at all in this football game. They just keep pounding it and pounding it and pounding it. It's typical Jim Harbaugh. It's what he did at Stanford. It's what he did with the 49ers. We're just going to play physical, smash mouth, run football. And if you prove to us you could stop it and we fall down a couple touchdowns, we're in trouble. But if you can't stop it, we're going to stay in this game, and eventually we're going to outlast you. So they proved to me, I thought they were overrated. I didn't like what I saw against Indiana. I wasn't thrilled what I saw against Iowa. I certainly didn't like what I saw against Maryland from an offensive perspective. I think Penn State might be a little overrated because that was a top 10 run defense, and they got destroyed. But the schedule for Michigan, man, I mean, Michigan State, Rutgers, Nebraska. Okay, so then you got Illinois, and I don't think Illinois is ready for prime time. And then Ohio State, they're going to be 11-0 likely at 11-0 Ohio State on November 26th. So kudos to Jim Harbaugh, who's up there in the echelon of, Nick Saban's and Dabo Swinney's when it comes to head coaching record since he was hired. And people tend to overlook that, including myself, because there have been bad losses or bad performances. And this season, they just keep getting stronger and they're starting to peak at the right time.
And what may be the head scratcher of the weekend, Mike? I mean, I was following this game along late at night. I didn't watch it intimately, and all of a sudden the score kept going, kept changing. Utah 43, USC 42. We talked, I think, last week or week before. You had said, "Hey, Lincoln Riley has them going okay, USC, but watch out. I'm not sure I'm sold on this team." A Utah team I know you were high on at the beginning of the year, had stumbled here and there. What do you make of this one? Again, it was obviously a home game for Utah, but what do you make of the Utes coming out with a 1-point victory and handing USC and Lincoln Riley their first loss?
So I kind of gave up on them. The Florida loss was a disappointing one. The UCLA loss made no sense to me. They were outplayed, out-efforted. UCLA played more physical. And then USC, I thought they would be able to sort of stymie the passing attack a little bit. And then, Caleb Williams at the half, it's 28-21. He's got like almost 300 yards pass. I'm like, you guys suck. Utah, you're overrated. I kind of wrote them off. And they kept going down a touchdown, as you mentioned, and they kept coming back and tying it. Then they go down a touchdown. And then Kyle Whittingham, man, just when I start to doubt him, and it's not doubt to the level of he's a bad coach. It's just doubt that, they're ever going to be a team that could push for the playoff. And they're not going to this season, obviously, with 2 losses. But he scores on the last, he scores the last touchdown, goes for 2. It's ballsy, and I want to clap and say, yeah, I predicted this loss. And not in this fashion. I thought this would be a lower scoring game, and I thought it would be sort of a ground and pound type of game. And I thought Utah might win it by like 10 points. The way they won was fascinating, but it just was not what I expected. So no bragging here on Utah. I still don't think they played a great football game. And I don't think they're playing as well as I expected them to, but they pulled out a win, so credit to them there.
What do you make of the remnants of USC now? Obviously, sitting with 1 loss. Oregon has 1 loss. UCLA, Oregon played this week, and UCLA has not lost yet. Who is the cream of the crop in the Pac-12?
So right now, I got my power rankings tomorrow, and I was looking at the Pac-12, and I've got UCLA 9 and Oregon 10. USC's not in it. And then they, you could make a case that they should be. But now, this is what's funny about college football is the second somebody loses, you start looking back at their resume and you're like, why did we think so much of them? I mean, they beat Rice, who cares? Stanford sucks, even though they beat Notre Dame, but Notre Dame sucks. Fresno State sucks. Oregon State, they beat them by a field goal on the road. Arizona State sucks. Washington State's Who have they beaten? So now, instead of 7-0, wow, USC is a top 5 football team and they got a playoff chance. This 1-point loss on the road, now I'm like, they're going to beat Arizona. They'll beat Cal. They'll beat Colorado. All 3 of those teams stink. We'll see what happens with UCLA and Notre Dame. But to me, this is going to be Oregon out of the North. I think that's clear. And it could be anybody out of this North now. It could be Utah. It could be UCLA. It could be USC. But I honestly think losing to Utah eliminated the Pac-12 from the playoffs because UCLA is not going to run the table, and even if they do, they might get left out. And Oregon's got that 85-point loss to Georgia. They lost by 46. I think the Pac-12 just lost any chance of a playoff berth by that 1-point loss.
So would you say the Pac-12 and would you say the Big 12 is in that same danger zone right now of not getting a playoff berth based on the cannibalization?
Yeah, but I believe more in TCU than UCLA. And this is, mad disrespect to UCLA. I shouldn't. They've played to the level they need to play to. I mean, DTR has been solid. The running game's strong. The defense is good. Chip Kelly's a very good coach. He's been there, done that before. I just don't believe because UCLA has always been a team that's won nothing ever. And I don't think that's going to change. TCU is leads, under Gary Patterson in a few opportunities. The one season against Baylor, they lost late in that season. And I just have a feeling, I have more confidence in TCU to potentially make a run. They're not going to. I think this is going to come down to the Big 12 is going to be out. The Pac-12 is going to be out. The ACC, Clemson better not lose. Because this is the year we could see 3 SEC teams in the playoff. And I know people go crazy if that happens, but Ole Miss is undefeated. Alabama's got 1 loss. We all know Alabama gets the love of every voter ever. Georgia's undefeated and Tennessee's undefeated. So let's say Tennessee loses to Georgia, and they got 1 loss. Georgia goes to the championship game. Let's say they go against a 1-loss Ole Miss team. Alabama has 2 losses, so there's so many scenarios here where there could be 3 1-loss teams in the SEC, and they could sneak them in. I doubt that's going to happen because I don't think it would be allowed. And of course, Michigan has something to say about this as well. But
and Ohio State, of course.
Well, I'm kind of giving Ohio State the Big Ten, and I should.
That's a play-in game, right? Essentially, Ohio State, Michigan's a play-in game.
It is, if all goes well. I mean, and I'm kind of giving that to Ohio State, and
right.
Listen, I shouldn't. They weren't. Michigan wasn't expected to win last year either, and they won handily. So I shouldn't really doubt the fact that Michigan plays this kind of old school pound football, and Ohio State has 85 5-star wide receivers, and they throw the ball around, and they put up 70 points a game. I shouldn't, but I always include Ohio State in there. So the reason I didn't mention them is because I kind of had them in the playoff. The other 3 spots, I think the Big 12 is going to be dead unless somebody runs it. ACC is dead unless Clemson runs it, and the Pac-12 is already dead. So then what do you do? Let's say Clemson loses a football game and everything I say comes true. Do you put 3 in the SEC? I don't know if the world will accept that.
I mean, it seems like we've all expected the 2-power conference structure. It just seems like that's right in your face much faster, I think, than people are going to be comfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about 6 of the best 7 teams in the country. To me, are from those 2 conferences. And I'm throwing Clemson in there as the one that's sort of, TCU to me is outside that. So, yeah, I mean, and so what this is going to do, though, the best thing about this, it will spur the playoff to come quicker. The ACC commissioner just mentioned they're trying to get that done for 2024 instead of 2026. And I'll tell you what, if the SEC has a team left out with 1 loss, or they get 3, that playoff's going to come quicker. Now, neither of those things might happen. We don't know what's going to happen in college football, but if one of those 2 things happens, we will have a quicker playoff.
All right, we're 7 weeks to the season, Mike, and I'll ask you a question I think I asked you in a previous show. Is Clemson any good? 34-28, they beat Florida State. Florida State scores a couple of late touchdowns. They had an onside kick option. If they recover that, this game gets a little spicy, but they come out with a road win in Tallahassee. Again, they're sitting 7-0 with a great matchup this week against, who would have thunk it, Syracuse in the AAC. But is Clemson any good? I just can't tell from week to week.
You just called the ACC the AAC.
Whatever I did, yeah. That's
that speaks to how they aren't that far off.
That's fair.
So, Clemson's got Syracuse. That's a tough test, but it's at home. At Notre Dame is just, Louisville is the same. They're just, Miami's awful. South Carolina. Clemson's for real. I watched a lot of Clemson football, and I see progressive improvement in DJ Uiagalelei, and in the offensive playmakers. Now they've got, a freshman wide receiver stepping up. Now they're using Will Shipley the proper way in that rushing attack. DJ's confident. He's starting to spread the ball around a little bit more. The Wake Forest game was kind of the tipping point of that. NC State game, he was much more comfortable, more confident. Boston College doesn't really count. And then Florida State, again, it was a situation where they could have, fallen apart. It's a tough road game. It's a great atmosphere. Florida State fans going nuts, and they've lost to Clemson forever. And they didn't. They just kept the course. So my answer to that question is yes, they're for real. I don't have them losing another football game, and I have them in the playoff. The funny part about this is they could be the number 1 team in the country. And it sounds stupid to say that, right? By playoff time, I mean. Because, well, didn't you just say an undefeated Michigan team is going to play an undefeated Ohio State team? Well, yeah. That's in the, we assume that's the elimination game, as you said. but there's still a championship game to play. And I'm not saying an Illinois or whoever wins the West is going to have a chance to beat Ohio State, but they could upset Michigan. You don't know. Clemson's probably the lock out of all of these schools, including Georgia, including Ole Miss, including TCU, including Tennessee, maybe including Ohio State and Michigan, to finish undefeated. They will beat Syracuse. They will beat Notre Dame. They'll beat everybody. And they'll win the ACC championship with ease and not have to worry about anything. So, yeah, they're for real, and they could be the number 1 seed, believe it or not.
What other game from the weekend caught your attention, Mike? Oklahoma bounced back with a win against Kansas, 52-42. That was interesting. James Madison enters the rankings for the first time, summarily loses to Georgia Southern. I'm sure you were all over that game, Mike.
Okay.
Wisconsin goes down to Michigan State in a battle of who watched that game. Any other contest pique your fancy this weekend?
You notice I have access to a computer. Well, you probably don't notice, but my phone is.
I could hear you clicking things. Yeah, I heard you.
Yeah. So that's kind of neat, right? I was intrigued by Kentucky and Mississippi State.
Okay.
I thought that was interesting, and simply because, Kentucky's a team that lost to South Carolina. Will Levis playing through turf toe. Chris Rodriguez back. Like, so many moving parts on that roster. Mississippi State, the team that everybody was high on. Oh my gosh, this team's going to be a problem. This team is really difficult to beat. Yeah, they lost to LSU early in the season, but look what they did to Texas A&M. Look what they did to Arkansas. Mike Leach has got it going on. He should be a top 4 coach in the SEC, blah, blah, blah. And then they have a stinker like every Mike Leach team has historically. There's always 1 or 2 stinker games. And this was one of them. Will Rogers got outplayed by a one-footed Will Levis. Chris Rodriguez ran the ball for like 200 yards on a Mississippi State defense that looked clueless. And they scored 17 points. 17 points. So, that game intrigued me a lot because Bob Stoops, not Bob Stoops.
Is he back? He might be back.
Mark Stoops went out, I don't want to start any rumors. Mark Stoops went out and he challenged his team and he said, listen, you guys – step it up. This is ridiculous. We're no longer that 6-6 football team. We're no longer that team that, has to back their way into a 9-3 season. You guys got to play better than you did against South Carolina. I don't care who's hurt. I don't care who's back. I don't care who's missing. The offensive line, you suck. You've been playing awful. You better step it up because you looked really, really bad. And of course, in the Ole Miss loss, they looked bad too. They stepped it up. Everybody stepped it up on that Kentucky team, won this game, by 10 points decisively, and proved that Kentucky is a true top 25 program. They're not the second best team in the East like I expected. Obviously, that's to be determined between Georgia and Tennessee, but they're still a good football team. So that was a big statement win, I think, for Stoops and a challenge to his program. They got Tennessee coming up, and I don't know. It's a sneaky, tough game to play. They're a tough team.
Interesting. All right, I haven't asked you this. Halfway through the season, we're basically week 7 here, halfway through a 14, 15-week season. Give me your top 3 Heisman candidates right now. Who's Mike have on his Heisman board?
I got 1.
There's only 1 candidate.
I'll give you 2.
All right, better than 1.
CJ Stroud has already won it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's over. The ballots have already been cast. Hendon Hooker is number 2. I would argue to put Blake Corum at number 3. But, when I do that, then I think of what Chase Brown has done and how much more important he is to Illinois. I think he should be in New York if he continues to play the way he's playing. But that's it. I mean, the quarterback play this season, honestly, hasn't been that great. Bryce Young has been hurt, and they're not going to win, the national championship barring something crazy. Caleb Williams, he had a really good game against Utah, but he's had two games before that were kind of clunky, not so great. Your passing leader in the country is Michael Penix from Washington. He's not going to get any votes. Nobody cares. It's C.J. Stroud, and you might as well give him the trophy now, unless Hendon Hooker can really start to put up even more astronomically good numbers, because the schedule just speaks very well to Stroud.
What's got you pissed off heading into this week 8, Mike? Something I'm sure is under your fingernails, bothering you, annoying you, irritating you. What is that thing?
I'm not getting credit for what I said after Auburn lost to Georgia and Brian Harsin wasn't fired. I said it on this show, and nobody really listens to this show that much. So this is let's not fire him. Let's let him hang himself with a bad record. So that way we can point out that it's not the boosters, it's him. He sucks. He's the problem. Our boosters are great. They love everybody. They just want a good coach. Had they fired him after that Georgia loss, which they should have. I mean, come on, everybody's getting fired. The guy's, I mean, he's being left out there to lose to Arkansas, to lose to Mississippi State, to lose to Texas A&M and Alabama. He's going to have a 4-8 season, and then they're going to say, well, he's not good enough. We fired him. It's completely apparent that when that Sunday went by after the Georgia game that there was no firing, that I'm the only one who came up with this amazing theory, and I'm not getting credit for it because it is really a smart theory.
Do you fire him before the Iron Bowl or after?
After. You let him lose by 60, and then you just say, well, I know what you're asking. Is like, what if he beats Alabama? I don't care. He's still gone. I don't care if he beats Alabama. Let's say he's 5-6 heading into that game. Let's say he beats Alabama by 2 touchdowns and goes 6-6. He's still fired. And so you let him coach the Iron Bowl. You let him lose by 50, and then you send him on his way. And everybody's happy, except that your team sucks, and you've set your team back probably 3 or 4 years in a very competitive SEC because you hired the wrong guy.
Well, we've gone 2-3 weeks now without a coach firing. We were going back-to-back weeks here. Things were looking great. So if it's not Harsin, who's currently on that hot seat?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of boring, right? I mean, there's.
Well, throw somebody in the hot seat, Mike. Make it unboring.
Oh, you want me to put somebody on the hot seat? I don't think I want to. I really don't think there's anybody that I can think of off the top of my head that really deserves it. I mean, okay, Jeff Scott, how's that? I mean, he should be gone at USF by now. I don't know what they're waiting for.
Well, they have any money.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's the other problem with a lot of these schools. David Shaw, he should be on the hot seat.
Oh, he just beat Notre Dame. Hold on a second. He's back. He rebounded.
Right. It's the first win in 11 FBS football games. They suck. He's making $9 million a year, but he's not on the hot seat because Stanford. As long as he graduates our kids and they're good characters, it's all we care about. Well,
let's talk Notre Dame for a second, though, because in the earlier shows, when you and I first started doing this, we were lauding the recruiting class Marcus Freeman was bringing in. He's bringing a bunch of high quality kids, a bunch of 4- or 5-star kids, whatever. Now their season's gone off the rails. Do you expect that to change? Do you expect him to hold on to these commits, or is this something where people are going to start jumping ship pretty quickly based on the result so far on the season?
Well, they'll lose a few. I mean, they already lost Keon Keeley. They'll probably lose the Bowen kid in Texas to either A&M or Oklahoma. The big dogs are sniffing around those commitments. And by the big dogs, I mean the ones with no academic restrictions whatsoever. Okay, so it's really hard
everybody else.
Yeah, it's really hard to get these kids. Well, Stanford's not, like Northwestern, they're not a threat. It's really hard to get these academically inclined kids to commit to you early and stay with you when you're 3-3 and you had 2 horrible home losses. And everybody's saying that you need to fire your offensive coordinator or that you're in over your head as a coach. All that stuff is tough to deal with. Now, the good thing they've got is that Notre Dame kids make a 40-year decision rather than a 4-year decision, and they don't lose a lot of decommitments. So this class isn't going to crumble. It's a very good class. They'll lose a couple more kids. The class will finish outside the top 5. And then all the Notre Dame fans that said Brian Kelly could never deliver us a top 5 class, look at what Marcus Freeman's doing. He can. Well, then they'll be wrong too, as Marcus Freeman delivers maybe a 7th or 8th ranked recruiting class. But I don't think they're in jeopardy right now of having things implode. I think future recruiting is going to be hurt by it, obviously, because there's going to be question marks. And the big thing about Notre Dame is the level of arrogance. I did an article about this on the website. The level of arrogance there of not joining a conference. So here's the advantage to joining a conference. It's not monetary. They can make money in TV deals without being in a conference. It's continuity. It's familiarity. They played a couple Pac-12 teams this season. They played a Sun Belt team. I think they played a Big 12 team and a Big 10 team. They're all over the map. It'd be really nice if they were in a conference and they got to play Iowa every year, or they played Pitt every year. It'd be that familiarity of, okay, I know what happened last year, this year, blah, blah, blah. We know what to expect. And I know coaches change and schemes change, but they generally don't change that much. Instead of an independent schedule where every year you may play the home and homes, of course, but there's that lack of familiarity of what to expect, like Alabama, Tennessee. Tennessee knows what to expect. They got throttled 15 straight times by Alabama. That familiarity kind of helps them, or it helps Alabama. We know this team crumbles when they do this, when we do this. And then the recruiting, they have to lower their academic expectations. The last time they did it was Lou Holtz. They haven't done it since for any coach. Brian Kelly did a magician's job there with solid recruiting classes, great coaching. His quarterbacks lacked, yes, but he made the title game, playoff twice. These things. Notre Dame's headed in the wrong direction if they don't change a few of these things. Marcus Freeman is not going to be the guy. He's not going to get you to 2 playoffs. He's not going to get you to the national championship game. He's not. And I don't think he's going to last, beyond 3 years. And recruiting will take a dip, but not this year, is the long-winded answer. And to put somebody on the hot seat, I'll give you Jimbo Fisher. He had a week off, right? So let's put him back on the hot seat. He's a 3-3 coach. His team stinks, and they're playing at South Carolina. Then they got Ole Miss, Florida, Auburn, UMass, LSU. It's not Murderers Row. They've played a lot of the tough teams in their schedule. But if he goes 5-7, 6-6, or if he loses at South Carolina, the heat is going to be back on him. So I think, Jeff Scott's under the radar. David Shaw's untouchable, probably. Pat Fitzgerald's untouchable at Northwestern, even though they're a nightmare. Jimbo Fisher, let's put him back on the hot seat.
Well, let's bring out the crystal ball for a second, right? So I counted 5, and there's probably more. 5 really kind of big-time first-year coaches that took over this year. Give me your Mike crystal ball 3 years from now. So Marcus Freeman, is he still with Notre Dame?
No.
Brian Kelly, still at LSU?
I got the list here, too, I think. Brian Kelly, no. 5 years?
3.
3 years, no.
Lincoln Riley, still at USC?
Yes.
Billy Napier, still at Florida?
No.
Brent Venables, still at Oklahoma?
No.
So one of those 5 you have hanging around past the 3-year mark.
And those guys, I have Mario Cristobal hanging out after 3 years, too, your coach.
Good one, yep.
So I'm doing a sort of a ranking of the first-year coaches, and I'm working on it. It's actually looking at the article. I haven't written it yet, but I put them in order. Lincoln Riley's my number 1 first-year coaches so far. Then it's Sonny Dykes, Dan Lanning, Joey McGuire, Kalen DeBoer, Jake Dickert, Mike Elko. Any of those names sound familiar? I mean, Dan Lanning maybe. No.
The majority of college football fans, if any of those people walked into their house wearing a shirt that said, "I'm Mike Elko," they'd have no idea who he was.
No clue. Then you got Brian Kelly. Then you got Billy Napier. Then you got Mario Cristobal. Then you got Marcus Freeman. Then you got Brent Venables. And then you drag up the bottom with Tony Elliott and Brent Pry. All the big-name coaches, except for Lincoln Riley, have been very disappointing so far in year 1. And it's not that that's unexpected. I mean, Brian Kelly lost half his team to the portal. Billy Napier inherited a team where Dan Mullen stopped recruiting for 2 years. Mario Cristobal inherited a U team with no wide receivers. None. And Marcus Freeman inherited a team. Well, actually, he had a pretty good situation. He's got no excuse. And Brent Venables lost his starting, his first QB1, QB2 to the portal, as well as 2 of his top wide receivers and his top tight end. So these things are expected, but myself, like everybody else, I didn't think Notre Dame would be good this season. I didn't think Miami would be that good this season. I didn't think Florida would be good this season, but I was stupid enough to think that Brent Venables would win 9 games. Actually, I was dumb enough to think Cristobal will win 9 games too. So I think we all fall into the trap that These guys are great coaches, and in year one, they can just snap their fingers and change. The guy who was set up for the most success out of this, other than Lincoln Riley, who brought his own success with him in the portal, was Dan Lanning. I mean, Mario Cristobal set him up. Great recruiting classes, top 10 recruiting classes for a couple years in a row. Great along the offensive line, deep wide receivers, good defense. Dan Lanning steps in there. We lose to Georgia 49-3, but now he's on the rise, and everybody thinks Mario Cristobal is a failure. Well, he stepped into a dumpster fire at Miami, and so did most of these guys. But there's no patience in this world. So when you say it, Brian Kelly at LSU, nope, not going to be patient enough. Florida, less patient than LSU. So they're gone. Oklahoma, no, the Boosters are not going to take losing. And Notre Dame, they're going to give them 3 years, and then they're going to say, oh, this didn't work out. Let's move on. So that's why I think those guys are all not going to last.
Well, it sounds like you can expect something on MikeFarrellSports.com pretty soon, discussing that and a bunch of other topics. Mike, what else is on the website these days? Any hot pieces? Any good thing people should look at?
So much stuff.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The people, we do okay, but we need more people bookmarking this site. It's ridiculous. So we got a recruiting wrap up of the weekend. We got a wrap up of the weekend itself, but so does everybody else. So that's not really exciting. But we have the top 10 running backs in the NFL draft. So where does Blake Corum, where does Jahmyr Gibbs stand? We got mine and Mike, is Miami ever going to be back? And I just sort of talked to that a little bit. The Notre Dame Blues, I just talked to that a little bit. We got an article about Kirk Ferentz and how it's time to go unless he fires his son, and he won't, so go. And I put up 8 reasons why Alabama fans should be worried. But we also put up a great article about how Tennessee has announced themselves as national championship contenders. And also our typical transfer performances, freshman performances, on and on. Probably been about 12 articles today alone. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe there's just too much content.
Well, that is your gain as a listening and viewing and reading public.
Yeah. Right? No such thing as too much content, right?
No, that's their gain, Mike.
You and I have our Mike versus the world. I did the Urban Wire one that went up on a Friday. I'm going to put it up again. We've got our Matt Rule one that's going to go up this week as well. What was the other one we did?
Wisconsin versus Nebraska.
That's going to go up too. And then we're going to do a few more after this too. So the video, you're going to see 2 super handsome men too on this website for the ladies out there. If you want to,
can't argue that.
Just bookmark the site. But I'm happy with the content. We've made some structural changes, some internal changes as we continue to grow this small little website into something fun that people can check out. And I will tell you this, the good part about it, I just did some number crunching. When I started this thing way back in like April, May, 99% of our traffic was from social media, which was essentially from my handle. We're at 47% from social media. So that means 53% is from referral, search, or direct. But people are starting to come back, and that's the key to life. So I think we're doing well.
Well, make sure you come back to this pod, subscribe to it in your podcast player. Again, the Believe Podcast Network. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. It'll be there as well in video form for all you ladies out there who want to watch Mike and I stare at each other and not shave ever. But we'll be back probably sometime soon. I'm sure to do another one of these maybe after next weekend's games. But again, bookmark that website and you can find us on there as well. Mike, until then, have a fantastic week. We will talk to you all soon. Take care, everybody.